defects in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills. Please, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for setting up this interesting conference in spring in London and inviting me to speak here. Let me say that I'm especially happy about all the Gong Show talks and the poster session. I think it was a great idea to include more of those. So what I will be speaking about is half BPS NAM-pole defects in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills. And the talk is based mainly on a paper I wrote with Adam Chalabi and Chen-Yang Su, but also some papers that I wrote with Costa Zarembo. And there will also appear some earlier work by Marius Deleuve, Thomas Gomber, and George-Lina Dopoulos. Okay. So what I will do is to start by giving a review of half NAM-pole defects in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills theory, focusing, of course, on the integrability properties. And here I will pay special attention to the so-called Grukov-Witten surface defects, which have only very recently begun to be studied from the integrability perspective. And the reason why I chose to look at half BPS NAM-pole defects is that being supersymmetric, they can also be treated by supersymmetric localization, and by using supersymmetric localization, you can get exact results for instance, one-point functions in the background of the defect, and these one-point functions, they reveal some intriguing, interesting structures of perturbation theory. And that is the content of these 2 points here, and then I will finish by a summary and an outlook. Okay, so NAM-pole defects in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills, they are hyperplanes, which are characterized by some of the fields of the field theory diverging as you approach the plane. So more precisely, the fields have to diverge as 1 over r, where r is the distance to the defect. And these NAM-pole defects, well, they are characterized by some classical fields. And these classical fields, of course, they have, by definition, to satisfy the classical equation of motion of my field theory. But I will also demand that they solve the NAM equations, which is what makes this setup supersymmetric. And as far as I know, there exist 3 types of such defects in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills, corresponding to the 3 possible values of the codimension. So there's the domain wall defect, which is of codimension 1, is characterized by 3 of the scalar fields having a vacuum expectation value different from 0. And let me remind you that this scaling is necessary in order for the defect CFT to be possible to be, for the theory to be possible to be a defect CFT. Okay, the domain wall defect is characterized by 3 of the scalar fields having a non-vanishing vacuum expectation value, and that theory is the one which has been studied the most. Then we have the so-called Grukov-Witten surface defects. They are, as indicated by the name, they are surface defects of codimension 2, and they are characterized by 2 of the real scalars having a non-vanishing vacuum expectation value, and also some gauge field potential components having non-vanishing waves. Finally, there's the 't Hooft loop line case, where we insert a monopole in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills, and then the world line of the monopoles becomes a one-dimensional defect. And to create a monopole, you need 3 components of the gauge field potentials of a non-vanishing wave. And in order to make it supersymmetric, you also need that one of the scalar fields has a non-vanishing wave. Well, I'm looking at a scalar field. Yeah, okay, yeah, in 4 dimensions, no. Yeah. Good. So here I have summarized some of the properties of these NAM-pole defects. So when you introduce a defect in n equals 4 super Yang-Mills, you typically also introduce some extra parameters to describe the theory. So here again, the domain wall, the Grukov-Witten surface defect, and the 't Hooft line. So these parameters, they can either be discrete or continuous. So for the domain wall, the extra parameter that one introduces is discrete. It's the size of some SU2 representation in the field theory language or some background magnetic flux in the string theory language. In the case of the 't Hooft loop or line, the extra parameter is also discrete, and it's simply the monopole charge. The Cook-Witten surface come in two different versions, known as non-rigid and rigid, and they have respectively continuous and discrete parameters. So all of these LARM pole defects have a dual description in terms of a probe brane system. So the domain wall is dual to a probe D5 brane. The 't Hooft line is dual to a probe D1 brane, and the Cook-Witten surface defects are dual to probe D3 branes. And the geometry of these probes are of the same type, so they always have an ADS part, which lies inside the ADS5 of the background, and then a spherical part which lies into the S5 part of the background. And furthermore, the ADS5 part of the probe embedding shares some dimensions with the background ADS5, and that's what gives rise to the defect in the field theory. Now these various defects, they have different symmetries. So the remaining global superconformal symmetry of the domain wall and the 't Hooft line is the same, but the Cook-Witten surface defects have a different symmetry group. Also, there's a difference in the background fields, these classical webs. So, of course, they are in general matrices because the fields are on the adjoint representation of the gauge group. But for the domain wall, these matrices are non-commutative, whereas for instance, the 't Hooft loop, they are diagonal matrices. For the Cook-Witten surfaces, they come in two versions again. One is commutative, and the other one is non-commutative. Okay. So let me say a bit more about these Cook-Witten surface defects, which are less studied than the others. So, as I said, there are two real scalar fields which get non-vanishing webs, and also some components of the gauge field get non-vanishing webs. So in what was called the ordinary non-rigid case, then the webs look like this. So they are diagonal matrices. Now I combine the two real scalar into a complex scalar. So they are diagonal matrices with some complex numbers on diagonal, and each complex number can be repeated a certain number of times. So these betas and gammas, they have to be real. And in this case, there's actually the space-time dependence appears out in front here, and it involves both a radial and an angular coordinate in the plane transverse to the defect. Okay. The classical background field for the gauge potential takes this form here, where the alphas are real and periodic. Okay. Then there's also a variation of that, which is called the rigid case. And that's a case which occurs if you solve the classical equations of motion with an assumption of logarithmic scaling, and also with the LARM equations, of course. And in that case, the classical fields are bound to be non-commutative. And more precisely, they have to take this form here, where the T1, T2, and T3, they constitute some representation matrices of an irreducible SU2 representation. Can be any dimension a priori. So it's a little bit like the domain wall case. We have some SU2 representation appearing, but the similarity is deceptive. The setup has other symmetries, and there are only two scalar fields which get webs. So this logarithmic scaling also introduced some distance parameter R0, and the scaling as such is also not as you see normally in conformal field theory. But the original paper introducing these defects states that conformal invariance is recovered if you in some way do the path integral over this R0, and that this setup actually corresponds to setting beta and gamma to 0. So at the moment we are working on understanding this in more detail, but it does not really influence our study of the integrability properties of these defects. Okay. So let me say a bit more about the string theory description of these Cook-Witten surface defects. So here I start by writing down the metric of the 8s5 times s5 background with the 8s5 here and the metric on the 5 sphere here, which I parameterize in this way here. So in this coordinate system, the world volume coordinates of the probe D3 brane, which is dual to the surface defect, are x0, x1, r, and psi. And it's supplemented by some embedding functions. So the D3, it sits at a point theta on the 5 sphere, and then it also wraps an S1 on the 5 sphere, but that S1 is somehow linked with an S1 inside ADS3 via this relation here, where phi 0 is an integration constant. Furthermore, we have an embedding function for y, which is ADS radius. It is 0 at the boundary and grows when we go into the bulk of ADS. And from this, you see that the radius of this sphere that the D3 brane wraps inside ADS3, it grows as we move towards the interior of ADS. So the brane probe is somehow cone-shaped in ADS. Okay, and I don't know if it comes from supersymmetry, but the entire setup is supersymmetric. So at some level, it probably does. Okay, but you see here there appears two integration constants, this kappa here and this phi 0 here. And they are both continuous, so there are, for the moment, no discrete parameters appearing here. And these two integration constants, phi 0 and kappa, they're related to the diagonal elements appearing in the classical webs for the scalars in this way here. So you see that what I denoted as a rigid case, which was supposed to be when beta and gamma go to 0, it corresponds to this integration constant kappa going to 0, which means that the size of the sphere inside ADS3 shrinks. Naively, it shrinks to a point, but the sphere on S5, it remains. Okay. So that is the string theory setup. Okay, so I will now finally let me get to why I speak about these objects at this conference. Namely, I want to look at the integrability properties at the one-point functions. So, of course, we know that one-point functions in the presence of a defect can be non-vanishing, and from conformal symmetry on the defect, they are bound to take this form here, where x perp is the perpendicular distance from the defect, if we consider a bulk operator. Of course, if this also requires that there's rotation invariance in the transverse directions, and if there's not, then there can also be some angular dependence on this C here. So in these setups that I've been talking about, we have these classical background fields, and due to these, the scalar operators built from scalar can of course have non-zero one-point functions already at tree level. And we find these one-point functions by taking our operator and plugging in the classical fields. So this is, in principle, a trivial procedure, but as we all here know, we first have to find our good conformal operators, and then we have to plug in the fields, and that is a non-trivial combinatorial problem. But sometimes it can be solved, and sometimes, at least at tree level and one loop, you can find the one-point functions in a closed form using the algebraic beta ansatz, and then we say that the system is integrable. And sometimes you can even go beyond the first few loop orders and derive an asymptotic formula for the one-point functions by using some kind of integrability bootstrap, which was done for the domain wall case by these two groups here. And now what we want to do is to see how far we can go with this program for these Gucke-Witten surface defects, which are less studied. Okay. Yeah, so here I have somehow just summarized the results. So what you do when you start studying a new type of defect, you start from some small subsector of operators and look if that is integrable, then you extend and see how far you can go. So we start by looking at the SU2 sector, which consists of just two complex scalars. And here, if you look at the non-rigid ordinary defect, then there are actually no one-point functions at all. But the rigid case, it's completely similar to the domain wall setup in the SU2 subsector, so you can read off the expression for the one-point functions at tree level from the result of the domain wall case. But that's somehow accidental. It's just in this small subsector. But it is integrable in that subsector for any size of this SU2 representation which appears. Okay. Then you can move on to the SO6 sector, or the SL2 sector, which consists of one complex scalar acted upon by covariant derivatives. And what you find is that in the SO6 sector, you can write the overlap in a closed form for all values of these betas and gammas which appeared. And actually, that overlap is something which you can read off from an earlier overlap for a D3, D7 probe-brain system. But again, this is somewhat of an accident, but the formula is known from earlier works. Now, the rigid case with where the SU2 representation matrices appear, it turns out to be less integrable than before. Actually, it's only integrable for the smallest dimension of the representation matrices for k equals 2. But then something interesting happens if you go to the L2 sector. It turns out that these non-rigid defects, they are actually not integrable. You cannot write one-point functions in a closed form. Whereas the rigid defects remain integrable, you can still find a closed overlap formula for the two-dimensional representations. And I should say that the way in which we test whether these sectors are integrable or not is by writing down the corresponding boundary state and acting on it with the odd charges of the integrable spin chain. And if that action of the odd charges on the boundary state vanishes, then there is a chance that the system can be integrable. And we go on and try to derive the overlap formula by using the strategy which has been devised by Gompa by using a KT relation, and then from solutions of that KT relation by some recursive strategy deriving the overlap formula. So by this method, we have derived some novel overlap formulas like this one here and here. These two were not known before. And let me just reveal what they look like. I should say that if you want to know more details, I hope you have looked at the poster by Adam, where he has, I believe, given more details about this. Here I just summarize the results. So here I show this new overlap formula for the SO6 sector for the rigid Cook-Witten defect and for the smallest dimensional SU2 representation. So you see, it takes this characteristic form, which was also discussed yesterday by Shota. It involves a superdeterminant of the Godin matrix and then some ratio of Baxter polynomials. And there's only a non-zero overlap if the beta roots of the corresponding beta eigenstate or operator come in pairs with plus minus the same rapidity. And actually this overlap formula is of the achiral type, where the roots at the middle node have to be paired between themselves, whereas the roots on the outer nodes have to be paired with each other. So it's another type of overlap formula. But this was already predicted in these papers by Beinok and Gompa. Okay. And I should say that this case here, the rigid case for k equals 2, is of course the only case where we can dream of going beyond one loop order and find a completely integrable system. Okay, yeah, so what about higher loop integrability of these defect setups? Well, for the domain wall defect, we know that the corresponding string boundary conditions, they are integrable even when these waves or background magnetic fluxes are present. This is shown in some analysis by Kostya and George Linadopoulos. And in accordance with this, there has actually been derived an asymptotic all-loop formula for the one-point functions by these two groups. For the Cook-Witten surface defects, we know a bit less. The string boundary conditions are so far only known to be integrable without the presence of classical background fields. This is contained in the old paper by Degel and Ors. And from our analysis, we know that we can only have hope for higher loop integrability for the rigid case for k equals 2. Finally, for the 't Hooft loop, so far the string boundary conditions have only been proven to be integrable without the presence of the waves. And there is a partial asymptotic all loop formula derived also by Gomber and Beinach, but it's partial in the sense that the reflection phase has not completely been fixed. Okay. Yes, but what unifies, well, okay, these are, the status of integrability is a little bit different for the different defects, but maybe this just reflects that we've been working on them for a different amount of time. But what unifies them is that all of them are only known up to wrapping effects. So what could we do to try and learn about wrapping effects? Well, we could try to see if we can learn something from localization, because, as I said, all these defects are supersymmetric. So by supersymmetric localization, you can get some exact results for one-point functions of chiral primaries in the background of the defect. And such results actually exist for all three types of defects. So let me go through this in the case of the 't Hooft loop. So let's consider the 't Hooft loop and some chiral, the simplest possible chiral primary, and its one-point function in the background. It's a 't Hooft loop background. In that case, one can do supersymmetric localization for a Wilson loop, which is dual to the 't Hooft loop under S-duality, and then using S-duality you can get a prediction for the one-point function in the presence of the 't Hooft loop. So the S-duality of n equals 4 super Young Mills, it exchanges lambda with size 16 pi squared n squared over lambda, and then it exchanges electric quantities with magnetic quantities and vice versa. But a chiral primary has no electric or magnetic properties, so it stays the same. Okay, so the expectation value of a chiral primary in the background of a fundamental Wilson loop is known exactly from localization. It was derived by Okayama and Simonov. So we can use this to get a prediction for the one-point function in the presence of a 't Hooft loop. So we apply the S-duality, or I should say these are Laguerre polynomials, and then we do an integral representation of these Laguerre polynomials and a large n saddle point for the resulting integral. And that leads to a planar perturbative prediction for the one-point function in the presence of the 't Hooft loop. And it takes this form here, where now R here is a distance from the operator insertion to the 't Hooft loop. So it's relatively simple, but becomes even more pretty if you uniformize it using Zukovsky variables in this way here. Then if I strip off the space-time dependence, I'm left with this relation here. So x to the power L, and then 1 over x to the power of minus L. And when written in this way here, these terms seem to have different origin, and it's natural to interpret the first one as normal asymptotic contributions, and the last one as wrapping contributions. This is the same kind of split we have seen in other examples as well. And it becomes even, well, you can also see that this starts out as 1 over square root lambda to the power L, which is what we expect for such a one-point function when we take into account the normalization from field theory. And this one starts much later, a power lambda to the power L later, actually. But it becomes even more evident if you expand out the coefficients. So now I've expanded out the one-point functions with the space-time dependence stripped off. And the black terms here come from the first term in the equation I had, and the blue ones from the second term. So you see something funny happening. So all the, for all the odd operators of odd length, there appears to be no wrapping corrections. And okay, you also see that these blue terms here, they start out as at the order that you expect for wrapping corrections, namely order lambda to the power L when you take away the normalization constant. But the operators of odd length, they have no wrapping corrections. And the ones of even length have, and they start as expected at the order lambda to the 2L. It's also kind of interesting that not only do these odd coefficients not have any wrapping corrections, they also terminate at a low order for all length. And that's actually something you see also for the other domain wall setups. For the other defect setups. For the domain walls, you have exactly the same structure. except that all the odd coefficients here, they actually vanish. For Gukow-Witten defects, it's even more simple. You also have this truncation, but you have no wrapping corrections at all. Okay. So now it's actually easy to write down a formula for these non-wrapping corrections, the asymptotic parts, in a closed form. And it takes this, it looks like this. So there's a 1, and then there's a sum up to a power which is the integer part of L over 2. Then we have this lambda over 4 pi squared, and then some combinatorial factor in front. And this formula here, we would like to recover from doing perturbation theory around the monopole background that is quantizing around that classical field that we had before. And that is actually possible. But let me, before going to that, say that we have exactly the same structure for the domain wall defect. It truncates at the same order. Okay, it vanishes for the odd cases, but for the even cases, it also truncates at a particular order. We have the same combinatorial factor and the same field theory factor, but then there are some Bernoulli polynomials coming up here, which depend on the size of the U2 representation matrices which appear. So now I'm cheating a little bit because I said I wanted to use this to understand the wrapping corrections, but actually I will postpone understanding the wrapping corrections until later. I'm, for the moment, trying to understand the asymptotic part. And let me do that for the 't Hooft loop case. So the very first term in this expansion here, we just get from inserting the classical web, that's easy. But to get any of the other ones, we have to quantize around the monopole. And that we have done. So let me tell you how you compute the one-point function in perturbation theory. So at the leading order, as I said, you insert the classical field, which is symbolized by these sticks here. And then the first non-trivial thing you can do is to make a one-weak contraction with one loop. And to do that, you need to find the propagators for the scalar fields. And it works in more or less the same way for all these defects, that there are some scalar fields which are easy and some which are difficult. The easy ones, they only mix with fields of the same type or same flavor, and there are some difficult ones which mix not only with other scalars but also with gauge fields. But you can perform the diagonalization process and find the propagators for the scalars. And in this case here, you need the propagator for two scalars of different type, one easy, one complex. And here I have written down what they look like. All the propagators in this monopole background, they are ADS2 times S2 propagators because of the symmetry of the problem. And the S2 part is taken care of by some Jacobi polynomial, and then there's some ADS2 propagator also. And here I've written down for the general value of the monopole charge before I set the monopole charge to the smallest possible value. And you see there's some relatively complicated sum over mode numbers, which comes from Kaluza-Klein reduction on the sphere. So this is a simple scalar, and this is a complicated one. But when you combine the two to take the full propagator, you have to subtract the two terms and some telescopes, and we're left only with two terms. And not only should we take the difference, we should also take the endpoints of the propagator to be identical. When we do that, something interesting happens. This tadpole diagram simplifies to 1 over 8 pi squared r squared. And then we have to also multiply by some vertex factor, which depends on lambda. And the final result is simply like this, where we have some part here which factors out in front of the one-point function as the space-time dependence, and then there's this simple coupling constant dependent factor. And using that, it's easy to see where this expression here comes from. This coupling constant dependent factor is simply the value of the tadpole diagram. And for a given L, this combinatorial number is actually just the number of ways you can make little n contractions on in an operator with L fields. So you put your L fields in a row, and then you have to pick out n places out of L minus n where you put a contraction. If you forbid contractions between the first and the last, and then there's another contribution if you contract the first field and the last field. So all these contributions, They come from simple tadpole contractions. These diagrams are simply flower diagrams with a varying number of leaves appearing. So that's pretty simple, and we see exactly the same phenomenon for the D3-D5 probrain system. There we had the same expression, but some Bernoulli polynomials. But those Bernoulli polynomials, they just come from tracing over SU2 representation matrices, so we can get the exact formula coming out again. And we see the same phenomenon for Gucher-Witten defects. Similar structure, but as I said, there are no wrapping corrections in that case. Okay, so that's what we learned, and that leads me to my summary and outlook. So, in summary, we have at least 3 examples of defect CFTs based on n equals 4, which are amenable to supersymmetric localizations, to integrability, and potentially also to boundary conformal bootstrap. The quantization is completed in all 3 cases. Supersymmetric localization has been completed in all 3 cases, and they have revealed an intriguing structure of perturbation theory. In the most studied example, we have actually obtained one-point functions from integrability up to wrapping interactions. So what we really need to do is now to understand these wrapping interactions, and we hope we have taken the first step in that direction with this work. And it leaves us also with trying to, I've said this many times, but I think one should also try to implement the boundary bootstrap program for these defects with non-vanishing classical fields. So, thank you.
Questions?
Thank you for the very nice talk. Since the localization result is also available for any value of the coupling and the S-duality works as well, is it possible also to achieve a result for the strongly coupled situation for the TOF coupling, so expanding the localization result, a weak coupling, and get a strong coupling result for the TOF line? And in case, is it possible to check that we get to a correct result?
Yeah, I think, yes, you can also expand for strong coupling, and I believe we checked the first term there. You can probably check more if you work hard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? I wanted to ask you, what is known about generalizations for higher representations of the Wilson loop and maybe very high representations like
that's interesting.
Giant or even huge?
That's a good question.
S-duality provides some information.
In principle, these higher representations of the Wilson loops, I think they were only so far derived from localization for the fundamental representation. But maybe if you work hard, you can get them also for higher dimensional representations and use S-duality to get some results for more general monopole configurations. It's an interesting problem, but yeah.
It looks like a complicated but solvable matrix.
Agree, yes.
So,
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
For this particular problem, why would you need it? We know the matrix model, so it's just for high enough representations. I'm not sure there are. Okay, good.
There are some special cases, I think, where the loop wraps many times, some submanifold, but to have a very specific representation given by some...
Like big representation.
Yeah, big representation.
This is
would be interesting.
Completely trivial. Okay. If there are no more questions, let's thank again Charlotte.